Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Last year, in January, Sylvia Duran woke up to something strange.
It was a Friday, and I was going to have a really busy day, so I immediately checked my phone to see what meetings I had that day, and I couldn't access my calendar.
Sylvia worked at Google. She had a high-level role on a YouTube marketing team and had been there for nearly a decade. She assumed something was wrong with her phone.
Honestly, I thought that there was a bug. Some kind of bug on my phone. It's happened sometimes.
Sylvia mentioned the issue to her husband at the time, who had a different take.
He told me, "Whoa, isn't that a sign?" And I said, "A sign of what?" And he said that you were laid off.
There had been some rumors about layoffs at YouTube, but Sylvia wasn't too worried. After all, the company was doing well, making money. Why would they lay people off?
I laughed it off. I said, "No, that's not what's happening."
But that was exactly what was happening. Sylvia, along with 12,000 of her colleagues across Google, had been let go. Sylvia says she was in shock.
It felt unreal, and at the same time, like all of my worst thoughts about myself had come true. That, of course, I was selected to be laid off because I never belonged there in the first place.
Sylvia loved her job. She worked hard at it. And being part of the company was such a central part of her identity, her mom even called her my mini Google.
They were really, really proud of me. And I think that they were surprised because in theory, I was a strong performer. And so why does a strong performer lose their job?
As she started to process what had happened, she began cycling through emotions. Shock, sadness, shame.
I started to question for myself, why am I feeling this way? Why am I feeling so ashamed? And I wanted to talk about it. I'm someone who processes verbally. So I asked my brother, who has his own podcast. I told him, would he be game to record an episode where I just processed my feelings?
Welcome to the One of a Kind podcast.
I recorded the first episode 3 days after I got laid off. I didn't think I was going to share it with the world.
But she did, in her very first episode, where she talked about her layoff and how it affected her.
After like almost a decade of my life there and the way that I went down, it was not a good experience. And I'm trying to process that.
Used to be, if you got laid off, you didn't talk about it. You hid it, fibbed about it even. Not anymore. Now, you start a podcast. Today on the show, the hottest new job market trend is posting publicly about your layoff. Owning it, sharing it, and feeling your feelings in real time for the world to see. What this shift in how we approach layoffs means for employees and employers everywhere. This is The Big Take from Bloomberg News. I'm Sarah Holder. Getting laid off isn't a new phenomenon. Bloomberg reporter Jo Constantz says that's thanks to one very famous American CEO.
Jack Welch just kind of made the practice routine as a way to meet quarterly earnings targets and for financial reasons.
Jack Welch became the CEO of General Electric in 1981. And when he started there, layoffs were pretty much a last resort for most companies. They were seen as a sign that a company was struggling or even failing. For Welch, though, layoffs became part of a proactive strategy. He would have all his employees ranked every year, and every year he would fire the bottom 10%. He called it the vitality curve, and in his first few years at GE, he laid off more than 100,000 workers. The practice caught on. It became known as the Jack Welch rule. And since then, layoffs have been seen as a good way to signal fiscal prudence.
For companies, the cost of labor is one of the highest costs on their balance sheet. And so it's something that executives are thinking about a lot in terms of how much they're spending on their workforce.
Layoffs are now just a reality of the American corporate workplace.
A professor that I talked to at Harvard Business School mentioned that part of the point of some of the layoffs now is to signal to investors that a company is serious about their cost cutting. So in that sense, they're signaling publicly as well, versus oftentimes in previous decades, it was less so the case.
But how workers grappled with that reality changed during COVID, when layoffs hit their highest level in decades.
So, I mean, the pandemic was a huge shift in this dynamic. We saw millions of people who were thrown out of work, and it wasn't their fault. Whereas, in the before times, there was always kind of this idea that if you were laid off, it really was your fault in some way, even if it was a business-driven decision and didn't have anything to do with you directly as a person and your performance at work. And so that, I think, was a massive change.
There was also the way people got laid off during the pandemic.
In decades past, you were in an office, you had to pack up your things, put them in a box, kind of walk out of the building or be walked out. It was public in a different way in front of your coworkers. Now the experience is completely different. Often it is on Zoom. And when you get that announcement and you shut your laptop, it's over. And you kind of don't have the same visceral feeling of closure that you might have had if you were in a physical office. It feels a little bit more surreal and removed.
One way to combat that disembodied feeling was to share the experience with others, not just with your former work-from-home coworkers, but with the world. What were some of the signs that we were thinking about layoffs differently in the pandemic?
Yeah, I think, on LinkedIn, we started to see so many people posting about getting laid off. They were looking for work. LinkedIn released their open to work banner, the kind of green banner that you see on people's profiles.
LinkedIn introduced its green open to work banner in June 2020. And since then, 33 million people have used it. Suddenly, what could have once been seen as an embarrassment started to be publicly portrayed as something else entirely.
It was more maybe a badge of solidarity. It was, we are all in this together, or so many of us are in this together. And those of us who aren't in that position, it became something that was collective in a way.
There it was, the slim silver lining of all this workplace bloodletting. The stigma around being laid off was fading. People weren't hiding it, they were talking about it, sharing struggles, asking for advice and connections.
It was just kind of showing what used to be a very, very private, shameful moment and putting it out there to say, this is what happened. And, implicitly it says, this isn't my fault.
The pandemic eventually ended and the economy came roaring back. But layoffs haven't gone away. What's different now is that layoff culture has been fundamentally changed. The stigma around layoffs is largely gone, and laid-off workers are now eagerly bringing their stories and their frustration to social media. Workers like Brittany Peach.
Hi, Brittany.
Hi.
You may have seen Brittany's video when it went viral in January. It starts with a caption, POV, you're about to get laid off.
Thanks for meeting with me.
In the video, Brittany is sitting at home, leaning over her computer, listening as an HR rep for Cloudflare, the company where she worked, tells her she's being laid off. But instead of just listening in shock the way some people might do, Brittany starts to push back.
Yeah, I'm gonna stop you right there.
Brittany asks the HR rep some pretty direct questions.
Wait, can you explain for me why Brittany Peach is getting let go? Do you guys even know? Why, who you're talking to each day?
She posted the video online and it got millions of views and thousands of comments, many cheering her on for standing up to the man.
So am I getting let go for no reason?
Which Jo says is how a lot of these TikTok layoff videos are getting received.
There is kind of a power that's being taken back there in terms of, I'm gonna own my story.
This morning at 8 a.m., I got a last-minute meeting invite titled Business Update with my whole team, my manager, my manager's manager, and someone from HR. So I think we're all about to be laid off.
And this is what happened.
Hello. I just got laid off. It wasn't anything personal, they said. It feels personal.
And I'm going to keep moving forward and you can follow along on my journey and like and subscribe.
Just overall really grateful for this experience and wish you guys the best. Thank you guys. Guess I'm a full-time influencer now.
Like, subscribe, and maybe hire me? what employers think of all this after the break. So far this year, more than 11 million people have been laid off in the U.S., and the job market they're entering isn't easy. Friday's jobs report showed the economy added just 142,000 jobs in August. And recently, when the New York Fed asked workers if they expected to be unemployed in the next 4 months, more people than at any time in the last decade said yes. So I asked Bloomberg's Jo Constantz how employers are viewing this new genre of layoff video.
Yeah, I mean, I think talking to recruiters, my sense is that it really depends on the nature of the things that you post. If you are posting about the fact that you were laid off, but you are framing it in a way, you know, this is what happened, and I'm looking for new opportunities, kind of spinning it in a positive way.
It could be like a cover letter itself.
It could be a cover letter, yeah. You could use it as an opportunity to re-engage and connect with your network and, you know, just kind of showing this is what I'm looking for.
But Jo also says there's sometimes such a thing as too much honesty, and not all hiring managers view past layoffs the same way.
There are other recruiters who feel very strongly that you should never admit that you've been laid off, that you should come up with another story. And it should be, you know, I'm taking a career break, I'm taking a break to travel, and just don't use the L word at all.
The other thing about layoffs is that for many companies, it's not just a way to signal fiscal prudence to investors. It's also a way to avoid firing people for cause.
Part of the reason some companies will kind of couch it as a layoff is because there's a little bit more legal protection. If you fire somebody, it's easier for them to sue for, you know, if they're part of a protected class, that sort of thing, if they feel like they've been discriminated against.
But Jo says that there is some evidence that the attitude towards letting go of workers for any reason is starting to shift for companies too.
There's research that says that companies that are quick to lay people off for financial reasons don't do as well as other companies that wait longer and do everything that they can to keep people, because it's very expensive to replace people, especially folks who are trained, who are good at their jobs.
So are layoffs bad for business?
Oftentimes, yes. I mean, there are times, of course, when business executives have no choice. They truly don't, for whatever reason. They've exhausted all options, and this is the only way to stay afloat. But I think there are a lot of cases where it's the first option, and it really shouldn't be. There are other ways to cut costs that can be considered.
And as for Sylvia, the former YouTube employee, she says she was lucky enough to get a good severance package, so she was able to take her time looking for new gigs. And as she was sending out applications, she kept making podcast episodes.
I can't believe this marks 20 conversations with incredible people in my life. Thank you to everyone who continues listening.
When an executive at Intuit came across Sylvia's resume, he started listening.
And so he said that at first he listened to the first few to get to know me, but then he enjoyed them, and then they became part of his routine. I was concerned that it was going to be a red flag. It ended up being a green flag.
Sylvia went in for an interview, and this past January, she started in a new role at Intuit. But she's returning to the workforce with a slightly different mindset. Did your layoff change the way you tie your identity to work at all?
For starters, my mom stopped calling me Mini Google, so they definitely have. I have, Sarah. I try to be very purposeful to say I have other identities outside of work. Obviously a mother, a daughter, a sister, a friend, and I also have a relationship with myself, right? And I now believe that by taking care of these other aspects of my life, I will be a better employee overall. So I have, definitely.
This is The Big Take from Bloomberg News. I'm Sarah Holder. This episode was produced by Thomas Liu and Jessica Beck. It was mixed by Blake Maples. It was fact-checked by Adriana Tapia. It was edited by Stacey Vanek-Smith and Rehan Harmansi. Our senior producers are Kim Gittleson and Naomi Shavin. Our senior editor is Elizabeth Ponso. Nicole Beamsterboer is our executive producer. Sage Bauman is Bloomberg's head of podcasts. If you like this episode, make sure to subscribe and review The Big Take wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps people find the show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back on Monday.